Captain America isn't just another superhero in the MCU. He is the heartbeat of the franchise, the soldier out of time, the man who never backs down, the moral compass who constantly has his beliefs tested, yet somehow never loses sight of who he is. In this video, we're diving into what makes Steve Rogers more than just a hero with a shield, what makes him a symbol of integrity, sacrifice, and the enduring question of what it means to be a good person in a complicated world. So, let's take a look.
Also, feel free to like, share, and hit the bell. Also comment below if you want me to look over any heroes.
From the beginning, Steve Rogers is the underdog, a scrawny kid from Brooklyn who can't even pass a military physical. But here's the thing, his size doesn't matter, his spirit does. When others hesitate, Steve steps forward. When the world tells him no, he keeps trying. That persistent, borderline stubbornness isn't just determination, it's the foundation of his heroism. Set against the backdrop of World War II, the first Avenger introduced Steve at a time when the world was desperate for hope. And in one of the most defining moments of his character, we see him cornered in an alleyway beaten down, yet still standing tall, declaring, "I can do this all day." It's not just a line, it's a thesis statement for his entire life. At the Stark Expo, Steve reveals his true motivation. "I don't want to kill anyone, I just don't like bullies." That's it. No thirst for glory, no hunger for power, just a hatred of injustice. And that's exactly what Dr. Erskine sees in him. Because the serum doesn't create greatness, it amplifies what's already there. For Schmidt, it twisted arrogance into monstrosity. For Steve Rogers, it magnified humility, courage, and compassion. Even before the serum, Steve proves himself. When others try to brute force their way through training, he uses his brain, like when he tried to unhook the flagpole. When a grenade lands in the middle of camp, he doesn't think, he throws himself onto it. That instinctive selflessness is why Erskine calls him not a perfect soldier, but a good man. After yet becoming Captain America, Steve isn't sent on the front lines. He is paraded around as a propaganda tool, mocked by the very soldiers he wants to fight beside. But when Bucky's unit is captured, Steve doesn't wait for permission. He risks everything to save them, proving that his leadership isn't about rank, it's about responsibility. From there, he becomes more than a mascot, he becomes a symbol. But even as he leads Hydra's downfall, Steve never loses his humanity. When Red Skull sneers, "What makes you so special?" Steve simply replies, "Nothing. I'm just a kid from Brooklyn." That humility is exactly what makes him extraordinary. And then comes the ultimate sacrifice. To save millions, Steve crashes the plane into the ice. His final words aren't about victory or glory, they're about Peggy and about the life he never got to live. "I had a date." It's a gut punch because for all his heroism, Steve Rogers is still a man who lost everything. In the Avengers, Steve Rogers is stuck in the modern day, often haunted by flashbacks of his past. We see this especially in the way he trains at the gym, using physical assertion to cope with his memories. When Nick Fury approaches him about the Avengers initiative and the Tesseract, Steve bluntly tells him, "You should have left it in the ocean." While he's referring to the danger of the Tesseract, the line also reflects how he feels about himself. Out of place, displaced in time, and as good as dead in his own mind. Still, Steve cannot ignore a call for help, and he accepts the task of joining the Avengers. He first steps into action when Loki attacks Germany, where he also meets Tony Stark. Their relationship is tense from the start. In my last video, I mentioned how Tony Stark once dismissed Steve by saying everything special about him came out of a bottle. But as we've seen, that's not the full story. Yes, Steve's powers came from the experiment, but what truly made him a hero, and what Howard Stark admired, was his good heart, bravery, and resilience. The serum didn't make him special, it only amplified what was already there. From Steve's perspective, however, Tony appears to be nothing more than a selfish playboy, born into privilege, someone who treats heroism like a joke and thrives on good press. As a soldier who witnessed countless sacrifices, Steve naturally distrusts a former arms dealer who profited from war. When Tony raises valid concerns about the Tesseract, Steve investigates and discovers that S.H.I.E.L.D. had been using it to develop weapons. Before they can resolve their argument, however, Hawkeye, under Loki's control, attacks the helicarrier. Forced to work together, Steve and Tony manage to save the ship, but in the chaos, Loki kills Agent Coulson, devastating the team. This tragedy forces Steve and Tony to find a common ground. Though Steve agrees with Tony's distrust of S.H.I.E.L.D., he insists they must focus on defeating Loki. This moment of clarity helps inspire the Avengers to unite. During the Battle of New York, Steve steps fully into his role as leader, drawing on his wartime experiences. He assigns each Avenger a role based on their strengths. Hawkeye takes to the rooftops for precision shots. Tony defends the perimeter from the air. Thor uses his lightning to thin enemy ranks. Black Widow stays on the ground with Steve to defend civilians. And Hulk is given the simplest but most fitting order: smash. Steve also shows his leadership beyond the team, directing police officers to evacuate civilians from buildings. His ability to command respect and coordinate both heroes and ordinary people cements his role as the Avengers' field leader. Together, they capture Loki, and Steve begins to adapt more fully to his new world, finding purpose in leading once again. Steve continued working for S.H.I.E.L.D. over time. During one mission on a ship, however, he became upset with Natasha Romanoff for hacking into the vessel's systems, an order he had not been informed of. This distraction allowed his target to escape, further deepening Steve's doubts about S.H.I.E.L.D. In his mind, trust on a mission means knowing exactly what your teammates are doing. Fury, however, believed Steve was best suited for saving hostages, while Black Widow was more willing to get her hands dirty, so he gave them separate objectives. Steve's real disagreement with S.H.I.E.L.D. came with the helicarriers. Their plan was to use advanced weapons to prevent crimes before they happen, essentially holding a gun to everyone on Earth. Steve argued that while his team in the past had compromised, they did it so people could be free. What S.H.I.E.L.D. was doing, he believed, was not freedom, but fear. This moment highlights Steve's character. Though he's a proud soldier, he doesn't fight for governments or institutions. He fights for the ideals his country was built on: freedom, liberty, and justice for all. His words even cause Fury to question the helicarriers. But this doesn't sit well with certain S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, who are secretly Hydra operatives. Hydra plans to use the helicarriers to eliminate anyone who could be a threat to them. They send assassins after Fury, including the Winter Soldier. At Steve's apartment, Fury hides but is shot and seemingly killed by the Winter Soldier. Steve pursues the assassin, but when he throws his shield, the Winter Soldier catches it, revealing his equal strength. Soon after, Steve himself is hunted by S.H.I.E.L.D. under Hydra's control, branded a threat to their mission. While on the run, he reunites with Black Widow, who provides him with information about Fury's attackers. Together, they investigate further and discover Artem Zola, a Hydra scientist who had transferred his consciousness into a computer. Zola reveals that Hydra never truly died. It survived within S.H.I.E.L.D., orchestrating atrocities in secret, and now planning to use the helicarriers to submit global control. Steve also learns that the Winter Soldier is actually Bucky Barnes, his best friend, who has been brainwashed by Hydra and no longer remembers him. Throughout the film, Steve experiences flashbacks of his time with Bucky and his days in the military. He even visits a museum exhibit about his past, showing how much he still longs for the life he lost. With Bucky alive but corrupted, and the government he served now infiltrated by Hydra, Steve begins to question everything he once believed in. He decides that S.H.I.E.L.D. must be dismantled and commits himself to saving Bucky. In a powerful speech, he broadcasts a message about freedom to all S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, urging them not to launch the helicarriers. His words inspire the loyal S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to resist, sparking a mutiny against Hydra. In the final battle, Steve fights Bucky, but he refuses to truly fight back. Instead, he tells him, "I'm with you to the end of the line," willing to die rather than harm his friend. Steve is ultimately saved by Bucky, who begins to regain fragments of his old self. Later, we see more of Steve's interactions with the Avengers in Age of Ultron. Though still their leader, he tries to connect with them on a more personal level. He encourages Bruce Banner to pursue a relationship with Natasha, warning him not to wait too long, perhaps reflecting on his own regrets about the life he never had. His relationship with Tony Stark also evolves. In the cabin scene, instead of antagonizing Tony for creating Ultron, Steve offers advice. Every time someone tries to win a war before it starts, innocent people die. This echoes his stance against the helicarriers in The Winter Soldier, where fear-driven control led to catastrophe. Steve later gives a speech to the team, reflecting on Ultron's belief that the Avengers are the real threat. He frames their mission as a test to prove whether Ultron is right or wrong. This speech reveals Steve's ongoing struggle. He has always wanted to protect and serve, but his ideals are constantly challenged. Each trial only strengthens his resolve to prove that his values still matter. In the end, the Avengers save the day, and Steve begins training a new generation of heroes, continuing his role as both leader and moral compass. In Civil War, during a mission, something goes wrong and civilians are killed. Soon after, Secretary Ross presents the Sokovia Accords, a proposal that would place the Avengers under government control, dictating when and where they can act. Steve, before the events of The Winter Soldier, might have considered signing, but even then, that's doubtful. He has always been the type to follow his conscience, even if it means defying orders. After what he learned about S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra, however, he cannot bring himself to sign. He tells Natasha Romanoff that he won't agree to the Accords. The death of Peggy Carter only strengthens his resolve. At this point, he doesn't care about institutions or politics. All that matters to him is helping people, and he believes the Accords will prevent him from doing that. Things worsen when Bucky resurfaces. Steve believes his friend is innocent, but the world still sees him as the Winter Soldier, responsible for countless deaths. While trying to protect Bucky, Steve and his allies are confronted by Tony Stark's team. A battle ensues, and though Steve's team fights valiantly, they ultimately lose so that Bucky can escape. Later, Steve learns the devastating truth. Bucky was the one who killed Tony's parents, while under Hydra's control. This revelation drives a wedge between Steve and Tony, leading to a brutal fight. Even as Tony beats him down, Steve rises again and repeats the words he once said as a powerless young man, "I can do this all day." It's a reminder that his strength has never come from the serum, but from his refusal to give up. Steve defeats Tony, but instead of claiming victory, he drops his shield. This act symbolizes his rejection of the system that made him Captain America. He chooses to live as a fugitive, no longer fighting for nations, but still fighting for what he believes is right. He later frees his imprisoned teammates and goes underground, but he remains loyal to them all. Even after their conflict, he sends Tony a letter, assuring him that if he ever needs help, Steve will be there. Steve continues to help where he can, and they eventually find Vision and Wanda. The team finds out that Thanos is after the Mind Stone, and Vision believes the best way to prevent him from getting it is for him to die. When Vision offers to sacrifice himself to stop Thanos, Steve disagrees. He knows Wanda loves Vision, and he insists we don't trade lives. For Steve, no sacrifice is acceptable if it means giving up someone's humanity. Instead, the team travels to Wakanda to try to remove the Mind Stone without killing him. Despite their best efforts, Thanos arrives. Steve fights with everything he has, even holding back the Titan's gauntlet with his bare hands, but it is futile. Thanos snaps his fingers, and half the universe vanishes. In the aftermath, Steve helps survivors cope with their grief, though he still struggles to move on himself. He dedicates his time to helping others rebuild their lives, offering advice drawn from his own losses. When a chance arises to undo Thanos' actions, Steve joins the mission, and though it takes time, Tony eventually agrees to help too. And in a powerful moment of reconciliation, he returns Steve's shield, acknowledging that Steve truly earned it. During the time heist, Steve encounters Peggy Carter again, seeing her remind him of the life he never allowed himself to have. After the battle against Thanos' wand and the Infinity Stones are returned, Steve makes a choice. Instead of coming back, he stays in the past to live a full life with Peggy. And that was Captain America's journey. He was a man born with no chance to be a hero, yet always wanted to be one. He dedicated himself to helping others, even at the cost of his own life. For much of his story, he undervalued himself. believing his worth lay only in service. The serum gave him that strength, but it was his heart, courage, and sacrifice that made him a hero. Over time, Steve learned to value himself not just as Captain America, but as Steve Rogers. By the end, he found balance, continuing to serve others, but also finally choosing a life for himself. Thanks for watching.